A sunny day on a busy Navy pier, with a huge gray warship towering over everything like a sleeping giant. Suddenly, a sharp voice cuts through the air. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the gangway." The voice was sharp, like a tool made to make people listen and obey right away. "This area is for authorized personnel only." Arthur Corian, who was 89 years old and felt every single year in his tired bones, just stood there without moving. His eyes weren't on the young officer talking to him, but on the huge gray side of the warship she was guarding, the USS Dauntless. It smelled like fresh paint, sea salt, and something else, a clean metal smell that pulled at memories hidden under 70 years of peace. He'd been invited. He was sure of it. The letter was folded in his pocket, the paper soft like cloth from being checked and rechecked. "Do you understand me, sir?" The officer pressed, stepping closer. Her name tag read Rostova. She was a lieutenant. Her uniform starched to an impossible crispness. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun. She radiated an unyielding certainty that Arthur knew well, the certainty of the young, who see the world in the stark black and white of a rule book. Arthur shifted his weight, a faint smile touching his lips. "I understand, Lieutenant." "I was just admiring the ship." "Admire it from the public viewing area," Rostova said, gesturing vaguely with a gloved hand toward a distant roped-off section of the pier. A small crowd was already gathering there, families of the crew, local dignitaries, and naval enthusiasts, all waiting for the commissioning ceremony to begin. "This quarterdeck is a controlled space." "I have an invitation," Arthur said, his voice a low, gentle rasp. He reached into the pocket of his simple windbreaker. "Everyone has a story, sir," Rostova sighed, her patience already worn thin. Another officer, a much younger ensign, stood beside her, his expression a mixture of duty and discomfort. He looked from Rostova to the old man, a silent witness to the slow-motion collision of protocol and persistence. "Unless that invitation is accompanied by a current military ID or a specific access pass for this event, I can't let you proceed." The crowd was beginning to notice. The murmur of conversations quieted, replaced by the craned necks and curious stares of onlookers. A confrontation, no matter how minor, was always a spectacle. Arthur felt their eyes on him, a prickling heat on the back of his neck. He wasn't a spectacle. He was just a man trying to get on a boat. Rostova's posture was a study in rigid authority. She stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, her hands clasped behind her back. Every line of her body screamed control. She was the gatekeeper, the unreachable wall of naval regulation. In her eyes, Arthur wasn't a guest. He was a potential problem, a loose variable in a perfectly calculated equation. An old man, probably confused, who'd wandered away from a tour group, a security risk. "I'm afraid I don't have a current ID," Arthur admitted, finally pulling the folded letter from his pocket. "It was from the Secretary of the Navy's office, but I have this." Rostova took the letter with a practiced disinterest, her eyes scanning it with a speed that suggested she wasn't truly reading, but merely searching for keywords she could dismiss. "This is a form letter, sir. It mentions you're a veteran. We thank you for your service, but that doesn't grant you unrestricted access to an active naval vessel during the commissioning." She handed it back as if it were contaminated. The ensign beside her shifted uncomfortably. "Lieutenant, maybe we could just call the CO's office just to be sure." "Ensign, I am the officer of the deck," Rostova snapped, her voice low but carrying a sting that made the younger men flinch. "I am responsible for the safety and security of this ship and its crew. I will not be tying up the captain's line because an elderly gentleman is confused about where he's supposed to be." She turned her full attention back to Arthur, her voice hardening. "Sir, this is my final warning. Please return to the public area, or I will be forced to have the master-at-arms escort you from the pier." The humiliation was a slow, creeping cold. It wasn't in her words so much as her tone, the weary condescension, the utter certainty of his irrelevance. He was an obstacle, a piece of litter to be cleared away before the important people arrived. The crowd's whispers grew louder, tinged with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. He could see phones being raised, small black rectangles capturing his quiet shame. Rostova's gaze dropped to the front of Arthur's worn windbreaker. On the left breast was a small faded patch, its colors washed out by decades of sun and wear. It depicted a dark blue circle with what looked like a silver trident piercing a roaring storm cloud. It was frayed at the edges, the threads worn thin. "And what's this supposed to be?" she asked, a faint mocking smile on her lips. She tapped the patch with her finger. "Some kind of souvenir from your local VFW post? A reunion keepsake?" The touch, the question, the casual disdain, it was a key turning a lock deep inside him. The bustling pier, the gleaming ship, the murmuring crowd, they all dissolved for a fraction of a second. The world wasn't sound, but a deafening roar. The guttural snarl of overloaded engines fighting a churning black sea. The air was thick, not with salt, but with the acrid sting of cordite and diesel fumes. A flash, not from a camera, but from an anti-aircraft gun on the shore, illuminated the panicked face of a boy no older than 20. Saltwater spray, cold as ice, lashed against his face, mingling with sweat and fear. His own hand, young and powerful, gripped the sleeve of a flight jacket right over an identical patch, brand new and vibrant. He held on as the small boat lurched, threatening to throw them all into the freezing, unforgiving water. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Arthur steady on his feet, his eyes clear. He looked at the lieutenant, her face a mask of smug certainty, and felt not anger, but a profound aching sadness. She couldn't know how could she. As Lieutenant Rostova prepared to deliver her final ultimatum, a man detached himself from the edge of the crowd. He was a chief petty officer, his face a road map of long years at sea, his uniform adorned with the quiet authority of someone who had seen countless lieutenants come and go. He hadn't recognized the old man, and he didn't recognize the patch, but he recognized the look in Arthur's eyes. It was a look of immense patience, the kind you only earn in places where patience is the only thing that keeps you alive. He also saw the uncomfortable shifting of the senior officers in the VIP section, who were beginning to take notice of the disturbance at the gangway. The chief didn't hesitate. He slipped his phone from his pocket, turning his back to the scene to shield the call. He didn't dial the master-at-arms. He dialed the direct line to the Admiral's flag aide, who would be on the bridge of the Dauntless. "It's Chief Miller," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get the Admiral. There's a situation at the quarterdeck. Lieutenant Rostova is about to detain a civilian." "A civilian?" The aide's voice was tiny, annoyed. "The Admiral is in a pre-brief. Can't the OD handle it?" "Negative," the chief said firmly. "That's the problem. The OD is the problem. Listen, the civilian is an old-timer. He's wearing a windbreaker with some kind of old patch on it. I don't know what it is, but trust me, you need to get the Admiral down here now." The chief's instincts, honed over 30 years of service, were screaming at him. This was not a simple security issue. This was something else entirely. The audience, through the chief's eyes, now knew something Rostova did not. The cavalry was on its way. On the bridge of the USS Dauntless, the atmosphere was one of controlled tension. Rear Admiral Thompson, a man whose career was as sharp and polished as the stars on his collar, was reviewing the ceremony's final schedule with his senior staff. His flag aide approached, clearing his throat apologetically. "Sir, a call from Chief Miller on the pier." Thompson waved a dismissive hand. "I'm busy. Have him pass it to the command staff." "Sir," the aide insisted, his voice dropping. He was adamant. "It's about a civilian being detained by Lieutenant Rostova at the gangway." The Admiral's brow furrowed in annoyance. A personnel issue. Minutes before a major event, Chief Miller said to mention a patch the man is wearing. He described it as a silver trident breaking through a storm cloud on a blue field. The words hung in the air. The busy chatter on the bridge seemed to fade into a dull hum. Admiral Thompson stopped talking. His head snapped up, his eyes locking. Onto his aides. The annoyance vanished, replaced by an expression of sharp, disbelieving focus. "Say that again," the Admiral commanded, his voice suddenly quiet and intense. "A silver trident, sir, piercing the storm cloud." Thompson moved with a speed that startled his staff. He strode to a hardened laptop set up on the navigation table, his fingers flying across the keyboard, typing in a series of classified access codes. He navigated to a deeply archived, sealed database of naval special operations history. A single file name appeared on the screen, Operation Sea Serpent. He clicked it. An image loaded. A scan of an old hand-drawn design, a dark blue circle. A silver trident, a roaring storm cloud. It was identical to the aide's description. The Admiral's face, normally ruddy and confident, had gone pale. He looked at the assembled officers, his expression grim. "Get my command staff," he ordered, his voice low but carrying the weight of an anchor dropping. "The captain, the XO, the command master chief, all of them. We are going to the quarterdeck. Move." The officers exchanged confused, alarmed glances, but complied instantly, scrambling to follow the Admiral as he strode toward the hatch. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew the world had just tilted on its axis. Back on the pier, Lieutenant Rostova's patience had finally shattered. She was oblivious to the high-level drama unfolding on the bridge. All she saw was a stubborn old man defying a direct order and making her look incompetent in front of a growing audience. "All right, that's it," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "I have given you every possible chance to comply. You are a security risk, and you are disrupting a naval ceremony. I am placing you under temporary detainment until you can. Be properly identified by base security." She took a step forward, reaching for Arthur's arm. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Now, this was the final irrevocable step, the point of no return. Arthur didn't flinch or resist. He simply looked at her, and his eyes held not defiance, but a deep and profound disappointment that was far more cutting than any anger he had. Survived so much only to be brought low by the blind arrogance of a child playing dress-up in an adult's uniform. Just as her gloved fingers were about to close around his thin arm, a voice boomed from the top of the gangway, sharp and absolute. As a rifle shot. "Lieutenant, stand down." Rostova froze, her hand hovering in midair. The entire pier fell silent. The crowd turned as one. Descending the gangway with a thunderous purpose was Rear Admiral Thompson, flanked by the ship's captain, the executive officer, and a phalanx of his most senior command staff. They weren't walking, they were marching, their faces set like granite, their combined rank a palpable force that washed over the pier. The metallic thud of their polished shoes on the steel ramp was the only sound. Rostova's face went white. She snapped to attention, her body rigid with shock and fear. Admiral Thompson didn't spare her a single glance. His eyes were fixed on one person only. He marched directly to Arthur Corrigan, the sea of onlookers parting before him like the Red Sea. He stopped precisely one pace in front of the old man in the faded windbreaker. For a moment he just looked at Arthur, his expression one of awe and profound respect. Then, with a motion so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air, the Admiral raised his hand to his brow in the crispest, most heartfelt salute of his 40-year career. "Mr. Corrigan," the Admiral's voice was thick with emotion, that it carried across the silent pier. "It is an honor, sir." Behind him, without a word, every single officer in his entourage, the captain, the XO, the entire command staff snapped to attention and rendered a salute. A wave of reverence. A dozen high-ranking officers saluting a civilian in a worn-out jacket. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones that had been recording a moment of humiliation were now capturing a scene of unbelievable deference. Lieutenant Rostova stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the impossible reality unfolding before her. This couldn't be happening. The Admiral lowered his salute, but remained at attention. He turned his head slightly, addressing not just Arthur, but the entire assembled audience. For those of you who do not understand what you are seeing, his voice boomed. Let me enlighten you. This man is Arthur Corian. And that patch on his jacket, he pointed toward it, is not a souvenir. It is the emblem of a unit that officially never existed, a special operations task force from the Korean War, codenamed Operation Sea Serpent. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. In the spring of 1952, intelligence reported that 2 enemy cruisers were preparing to leave Wonsan Harbor to ambush a U.S. carrier group. The harbor was a fortress protected by minefields and shore batteries. A conventional airstrike was deemed too risky. So a team of 12 men, volunteers, from the Navy's underwater demolition teams, the forerunners of today's SEALs, was sent in. The Admiral's gaze returned to Arthur. They went in at night in rubber rafts through mined waters in freezing temperatures. They navigated past patrol boats and harbor defenses, carrying limpet mines. They attached those mines to the hulls of both cruisers, right under the enemy's nose. They were discovered on their way out. A firefight ensued. Of the 12 men who went in, only 4 made it back to the submarine waiting for them. Those 4 men saved the lives of over 5,000 American sailors on that carrier group. Their mission was so secret it was sealed for 70 years. Their families were told they were lost in a training accident. He took a deep breath, his voice filled with reverence. This man, then Ensign Arthur Corian, led that mission. He's the last surviving member of Operation Sea Serpent. The letter in his pocket wasn't a form letter. It was a personal invitation from the Secretary of the Navy to be the guest of honor at the commissioning of this ship, the USS Dauntless, named in honor of the courage he and his men showed that night. The silence on the pier was now absolute, thick with awe and shame. The crowd stared at Arthur, no longer seeing a confused old man, but a titan of history, a ghost of unimaginable valor walking among them. Finally, Admiral Thompson turned, his eyes on Lieutenant Rostova. His voice dropped, losing its booming quality and becoming a blade of ice. You stand on a deck bearing the name Dauntless, he said, his words precise and devastating. A name meant to honor courage in the face of overwhelming odds. You wear the uniform of the United States Navy, a symbol of service and sacrifice. And, with all that history beneath your feet and on your shoulders, you looked at a hero of that history, and you saw a problem to be managed. He stepped closer to her. Your job is to enforce regulations, Lieutenant. But your duty is to exercise judgment, to see the human being behind the rules, to understand the spirit of the law, not just the letter. You saw a frail old man. You should have seen a piece of the very bedrock this Navy is built on. Your authority does not grant you wisdom, it demands it. You have failed that demand in a spectacular fashion. Report to my flag captain's office at 0800 tomorrow. You and I are going to have a very long conversation about your future. The Admiral turned back to Arthur, his expression softening into one of profound apology. Mr. Corian, on behalf of the entire United States Navy, I am so deeply sorry for the disrespect you have been shown. Arthur raised a hand, stopping him. He looked past the Admiral, his gentle eyes landing on the mortified, trembling Lieutenant Rostova. Admiral, Arthur said, his voice quiet but clear, the uniform changes. The ships get bigger, the weapons get smarter, but the water is just as cold, and the fear is always the same. She was doing her job. Maybe a little too well, he added with a hint of a smile. Don't be too hard on her. The best lessons are always the hard ones. I ought to know." As he spoke those words of grace, a final clear image bloomed in his mind. The churning sea again, but this time from the quiet, dark interior of a submarine. He and the 3 other survivors wrapped in blankets, shivering uncontrollably, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief for the friends they'd lost. Their commanding officer stood before them. He held 4 small, newly made patches in his hand. He pressed one into each of their palms. "No one will ever know what you did tonight," the CO had said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "There will be no medals, no parades, but you will know. And we will know. This is for you. So you remember what it cost to be dauntless." Weeks turned into a month. The story of what happened on the pier of the USS Dauntless became a quiet legend. On the base, Lieutenant Rostova was not discharged. Instead, she was reassigned. Her new duty, mandated personally by Admiral Thompson, was to develop and lead a new command-wide training program focused on naval heritage and veteran relations. It became known, Riley, as the Rostova Mandate. It was a punishment, yes, but it was also a path toward redemption. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Arthur Corian was sitting in his usual spot at the local VFW post, nursing a cup of black coffee. The place was quiet, smelling of old wood, stale beer, and camaraderie. The door creaked open, letting in a sliver of gray light. Eva Rostova stood in the doorway, wearing civilian clothes. She looked younger, smaller, and infinitely more vulnerable. Without her uniform, she spotted him and hesitated, then walked slowly to his table. She was clutching a thick hardcover book, The Complete History of Naval Special Warfare. "Mr. Corian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur looked up and smiled, a genuine welcoming smile that reached his eyes. "Lieutenant, please call me Art." She clutched the book to her chest. "I was wondering if you would sign this for me." "I'd be honored," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him, "but only if you'll sit and have a cup of coffee with me." She sat, her movements stiff and uncertain. He took the book and a pen she offered. He didn't sign his name on the title page. He opened it to the chapter on the underwater demolition teams in Korea. In the margin he simply wrote, "For Ava, never forget the sailors, not just the ships." Art Corian. He pushed the book back to her. She looked at the inscription and her eyes welled up. "I wanted to apologize again," she stammered. Arthur waved it away. "You have," he said kindly. "Now you're learning." "That's better than any apology." He leaned forward slightly. "Let me tell you about a man named Danny, the best radio man I ever knew. He was from a little town in Ohio, and he was terrified of the dark." And acid rain pattered against the windows of the VFW hall. The old hero and the chastened young officer sat,